Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you're from. Thank you for joining us for the Build Reuse Conference recap. There's so much that we're going to be sharing with you all today, and I'm actually personally grateful for this opportunity. I ended up being kind of a tech person or try to get the room temperature warmer person during the conference, and I actually missed quite a bit. So this recap is actually benefiting me, but obviously for those who missed a session, obviously for those who couldn't attend, this is also a benefit for you as well. So my name is Melissa Wenzel. I work at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. I'm the Built Environment Sustainability Administrator. And I've been to every single conference that Build Reuse has hosted since 2019, online and in person. So I'm very happy to be here today. And we have a number of people joining us from around the nation, perhaps other countries. But the session is being hosted by people from Minnesota, in Minnesota, Western Wisconsin, but it's not going to have that kind of focus. It's not going to have a Midwest focus. This is for us to learn from other people. And I'm excited for us to get going. Panelists, do you want to introduce yourselves really briefly?
Sure. I'm Katie Queasley. I'm an architect with Perkins & Will in the Minneapolis office, and I work a lot in the adaptive reuse space, and so that is why I attended and was interested to participate in this conference.
Thank you.
I'll go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Joshua Hoff, and I am the Community Resilience Coordinator at Rethos. We're a historic preservation nonprofit. We have a bunch of different varied programs. So I get the pleasure of working with Emily, who you'll be hearing from in a minute, in the education program. But I also have the pleasure of working on our policy and Minnesota Main Streets program as well. So happy to be here.
I can go next. My name is Emily Norris, and I'm the education manager at Rethos. I get the lovely pleasure of working with Josh there. And I run our education program, which, thanks to Natalie, who is also one of our speakers today, has been able to take a really great I'd say down the rabbit hole approach to deconstruction and bringing a lot of it into what has initially been sort of traditional historic preservation style education and moving into more of the sustainability and reuse of old building materials.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Hennigan. I am the Community Outreach Director at Habitat for Humanity of the Greater La Crosse region in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and formerly of Rethos in St. Paul. I also sit on the board of Build Reuse.
I can go next. I'm Olivia Cashman with Hennepin County. I work in our Department of Environment and Energy, specifically on our waste reduction and recycling team, where I coordinate our building reuse grant program. So give grants to property owners to both deconstruct and also incorporate used building materials in projects. And I also was recently elected to the Builder Use Board at conference with Melissa. So really excited to share some of the insights from the conference with you all. I think Victor is the last.
If I'm the last, I'll go. Victor Krause. I'm with the University of Minnesota up in Duluth at the Natural Resources Research Institute. I am a principal investigator on a project working with two different companies. One is working on building deconstruction and waste diversion at the landfill, and another one is working on waste diversion through household items such as mattresses and soft furniture. And we are tasked a lot of the times with trying to find reuse opportunities for a lot of the materials that would otherwise find themselves into the landfill, making things from lumber and those items that have been harvested from deconstructed houses, or doing things like a chemical conversion or a bioconversion from wood product to biochar, biocoal that can be used as carbon sequestration and lend top dressing for farm use or daily cover at landfills to help mitigate odor. So those are a bunch of the things that are possibilities with a lot of the things that we just dump away. So
Great. Well, thank you all. And for those that are not presenting, with the majority of you, feel free to introduce yourself into chat if you want to put some of the same information that our speakers spoke about in terms of who you are, who you work for, what you do, what you love, anything that's related to the built environment. Feel free to throw that into chat. And let's get started. I'm going to do a bit of a brief intro to the actual conference itself. It was held in Savannah, Georgia, in a very, very beautiful building that has been preserved and just a great space for a lot of different types of venues. It was a really good conference in terms of number of people. We had a record number of people show up and so many great speakers. I like this slide as faded as it is because it reminds me that of a phrase that I use on a regular basis. We don't urge deconstruction at all costs. Not everything is meant to be reused that can be deconstructed, things like that. So part of it is making sure that we remember the humans that are connected to that place. And this was a really good slide that just sort of like stuck with me throughout the entire conference. We value buildings because of the people who built it, who maintained it, who use it. It's also got great bones, but it's also the people who use it that's important as well. This comic was shared. I personally had not seen it before, but I found it very delightful that people in prison were trying to break out of prison and admitted that they can't because the wood floors underneath are really nice. So, you know, a lot of humor, a lot of us really appreciate that kind of humor, so that's good. This slide from Boulder, Colorado, this was an opportunity for us to see, as if we didn't know this already, just how much we just revere the bulldozers, how much we just love it, and we have all these books for it. We need to have books about deconstruction, about adaptive reuse, about building preservation, and get people to fall in love with that. Of course, it's not a machine, so I mean, it's a system, but yes, it's probably hard to write kids' books for deconstruction. But boy, if we can get people started at a young age, but it does remind me how much we think about in terms of starting over. Tearing down a building means a new beginning, and all those things, you know, let's tear down the old and build new. Well, that mindset definitely needs to change, and we're all here working towards that change. I want to do a quick shout out. One of the presentations that I really enjoyed hearing about, and Jory, sorry I lifted these photos from your presentation, but or at least just this one slide. But Urban Machine is a game changer in terms of reusing wood. This tool, this device, this machinery can take in wood that has nails in it, metal, paint, stuff like that, and make it look almost brand new. And I know, Vic, you've been in contact with Jory and others. Vic, tell me more about that. What have you guys talked about in terms of being able to get this tool in Minnesota?
We've been actually following the Urban Machine since Urban Machine 1.0, since they first kind of threw up their YouTube videos. We thought it was a really cool thing. We've been tracking ways to improve deconstruction specifically for the people we work with, but finding other alternatives to sometimes manual labor that damages the wood and, you know, devalues it, if you will. So when we saw Urban Machine, it was one of those, we're going to keep track of this as it goes through its improvement iterations, and it's gotten a lot faster. It's gotten a lot more efficient. It's gotten its ability to track and find the fasteners that are stuck in the wood and remove fasteners that we in the past had a hard time trying to figure out how to get out of there. So I think, you know, as time goes on, this thing's going to get nothing but faster and more efficient and better. And of course, you know, as new technology becomes old technology, hopefully it becomes a little bit more affordable, whether it's for groups of people or what have you. but to be able to have this available across the country really would spur this. I think we really would spur this movement to try to produce reusable lumber from old buildings or deconstructed structures, simply because it takes all of the guesswork out of removing fasteners from them. You're right when you said it was a game changer. It definitely is becoming the thing to watch on the horizon for sure.
And to me, it makes so much sense to have the University of Minnesota work with folks at Urban Machine and see if we can get this tool, this machine in Minnesota, because that makes the most sense. We have the Center for Sustainable Building Research. We have you, Victor, up at NRRI. We have more and more classes and efforts dedicated to teaching sustainability. And this would be a great opportunity for a lot of us to learn how awesome this tool actually is. I've never seen it in person. I've just seen videos, but Jory, if you wanted to put a link in chat, you're welcome to, so people can watch along. I didn't plan this. We're kind of casual today, so putting people on the spot, but people who are usually willing to be put on the spot. All right, I'm going to hand it over. I have into the notes who's speaking, but I can't see those. So whoever is presenting, go ahead.
Well, I know Natalie wants to talk a little bit about the same ones, so I'm happy to get started. I've got my notes with me, so hopefully it'll be straight from the horse's mouth here. But this was probably my favorite session at the conference, and that's crazy to say because there were a lot of really fantastic sessions. But what I took away mainly from the staff of Rebuilding Center is, of course, and this is, of course, stuff that most of us already know, but deconstruction and the reuse of materials, of course, keeps the value and stories of those materials, and it keeps them in the economy or in the local economy and the community, so that they can access the value that is inherent within these resources and use them to build their own wealth over time. So it's pretty important that we keep materials usable and where they are. Of course, since deconstruction and reuse does support such a local reuse economy, the benefits remain there as well. So Rebuilding Center is primarily a climate justice organization, is what they said. It's actually right there on the screen too. So it's just a really, really fantastic organization and approach to reclaiming these materials, doing it all with such a sustainable mindset, and of course incorporating it to the people that need it most in the community. So they just have a really, really good set of programs that support people in their community, and it was just really fascinating and inspiring to hear them speak. One of the biggest takeaways from this particular session is actually a question. So they shared a little bit about how they view their operation. You know, they price materials just to keep the lights on, essentially. It's like they are really doing what they can to pass the value on to the people in the community and the people who are choosing to buy these reused materials. And they asked the question in the session. You know, a big issue with the reuse market is how can we get it to be more functional, how we can get it to compete, and of course there's a huge educational component there. But they asked the question, if we have materials that we can reuse and we have people who need materials for cheap prices, maybe that should be the focus of moving forward. And that's certainly not the case for everybody. If that doesn't make sense for your organization where you are, but I just think that was a really, really fascinating point that I hadn't heard anyone ask before. So yeah, it's just kind of thinking about what market we want to be working towards and the people that we want to serve in doing it. And then there's one more statistic that I'll share about this presentation, just because I think it's so fascinating. But they shared that it costs about 10 times more to build affordable homes than to repair them. And I think that statistic came from the Urban Land Institute. And then I'm not sure where this other statistic came from, but it was on the presentation. So if there's any access to that, maybe we can look into that. But they say for every $1 spent on repair, it can save $19 in Medicare costs. So in an industry where we're kind of looking for money and investment at all times, I think it's really important to to communicate what costs can we save by investing in this, to kind of further communicate that towards policymakers and people who have the power to make scalable change that we're looking for and need in the industry. So that's all I really had to share about this one. I'll pass the floor to Natalie if you want to take over and share what your thoughts on this presentation were.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I had a lot of similar feelings and reactions to this presentation, and in particular, coming from the Habitat for Humanity world, we're thinking a lot about, we're not just living in a climate crisis, we're living in an affordable housing crisis. And not only do we not have enough units, we have aging housing stock. And so both Rebuilding Center and Community Forklift have really fantastic programs for providing reused secondhand material specifically for home repairs, for allowing low-income folks to stay in their homes safely and affordably. And so it really triggered or inspired some thoughts and ideas from my day job, where we are trying to build homes that are sustainable and energy efficient and are going to last a long time. We also offer services. A lot of Habitat for Humanities offer home repair services. This might not be as well known. People think we just build houses, but we do a lot of repair and rehab of existing houses, and we have a restore infrastructure. So we already have this reuse center that is collecting materials and sending them back out into the community. But I'm very inspired by the opportunities to collect these secondhand materials through our own strip salvage or deconstruction, or from our donors, and then put them focused on low-income housing or low-income home repairs. So both of these organizations provided some serious inspiration for me, and lots of ideas for bringing more Habitat for Humanity and affordable housing folks into the build reuse world.
Okay, sit down. Sit down.
Somebody needs to sit down.
That's awesome. This is why I'm so glad we're having this opportunity, because I wouldn't have necessarily known this if I hadn't had this sort of recap, because I did not get to attend this particular session. Still you, Josh?
Yep. And then I believe back to Natalie, but to be determined.
Okay.
So very similar takeaways from this presentation. Well, I think I'm going to draw a particular focus to some particular language that they used, because it was really, really powerful. So Rebuild ATL, of course, a very fantastic group down in Atlanta, also had an incredible session. And I think what stood out the most is just their approach with community engagement. I think it's pretty clear that projects by the community are best for the community. And that's something that this organization really does live by, and they're doing such fantastic work. And, very similar to home repair, we're seeing a lot of neighborhoods that have been historically disinvested, suffering from deferred maintenance costs, high energy costs, and that over time, of course, contributes to lowering value of the homes. And if there are a lot of lower valued homes because of this disinvestment, that makes a perfect breeding ground for gentrification and a lot of these luxury apartment buildings that we're seeing everywhere that aren't really meeting residents with their income. And so what this organization in this presentation said is pretty much that gentrification is absolutely equity theft, and it is super relevant in the reuse space. We definitely need to be working to protect low-income homeowners in this way, working on those deferred maintenance, making this education, or making this kind of concept of gentrification as equity theft. And they go further to say that it's the new colonization, which I think to many degrees is very, very true and very important that we recognize in our area and in our country, because it's everywhere, and it is a huge issue for a lot of people. So that was, again, similar to the reuse as resilience, but I think one particular takeaway that kind of inspired me and how I can bring that back to the work I do is kind of just that, again, on that education piece of gentrification is the new colonization, and how can we equip low-income homeowners to acknowledge that so that they can take the proper steps to protect their property, protect their histories, protect their communities, and to build and pass on their wealth. So.
I only want to add one more little note on this session too. And you see that the Rebuild ATL Coalition is a group of more than 40 organizations, which is sort of mind-blowing. And what I loved was that they shared values that this coalition wrote down and reviewed regularly throughout their whole process and continue to do so. I think that is so powerful for cross-sector collaboration to be leading with values and holding yourselves to them. And then I'll also say that a couple weeks after the Build Reuse conference, I happened to be in Atlanta for a Habitat conference and took my Habitat colleagues to Lifecycle Building Center. I had never visited there either. And we were all just like walking around in a daze. It was so beautiful and awesome. So it was highly encourage a visit.
So this one is me. And I'm gonna say it is a little daunting to try and summarize some of these presentations because they were so fantastic and because I was just sitting there like scribbling notes the whole time. So this is mostly a summary from my notes on the next two presentations that I found to be some of the most impactful that I was able to attend. This was the Monday keynote with Bridgette Frasier. She is from Bluffton, South Carolina, which is right outside of Savannah, Georgia. She even said that they're so close to the border that people from Bluffton get in-state tuition in Georgia. And she is someone who has worked with Repurpose Savannah, who was the conference host, on a project which is currently underway that I included a picture of here. So she's talking about the sort of the possibilities and the pitfalls around historic preservation and the deconstruction and reconstruction of old buildings, both in the saving of cultural resources, but also in the cost, both financially and personally, to doing sort of historic preservation in this type of work. So she talked about it as the struggles and the benefits of repurposing historical structures. So the challenges that she addressed were that it is financially costly, that there's an intensive bureaucratic process, that there's a lack of monetary incentives and understanding from governmental entities when dealing with historic preservation, especially in buildings that are not quote unquote, beautiful, so to speak. And there is an issue with public opinion because everybody has an opinion about their neighborhood and everybody should have an opinion about their neighborhood. So she talked about the fact that she had dealt a lot with the lack of options for the reconstruction of old buildings or the repurposing of old buildings in the local policy in Bluffton, South Carolina, and how she had faced against these problems and because of that decided to join the Bluffton City Council in order to sort of mitigate and revise some of the policy issues that she had interacted with. So in the process of doing some of her own development work on Ma Daisy's porch and then later on sorry, I have a cat crawling into my lap, here, say hi. On the Deer Tongue building, which we're going to be talking about here, she was able to create a preservation fund, which is about $30,000 to $40,000 for preservation done by private entities that can be used for people who are in Bluffton who are able to interact through the Historic Preservation Commission. They also created a property tax freeze for 25 years if people inherit and redevelop historic properties. So the building that we're looking at here, and this I'll just clarify, is a picture of Bridgette. And you should totally look her up. I actually pulled a couple of articles that I will link in the chat once I'm done talking on both Bridgette and the work that she's doing on the city council and in her historic redevelopment of the Deer Tongue building, which is this building right here. So just to clarify, because she said this in her presentation and I thought it was really funny, the Deer Tongue building is not called the Deer Tongue building because they hung deer tongues in it, but because they hung the plant called deer tongue in there because it becomes an aromatic if you dry it out, which I just thought was cool. So essentially what she's doing with this building, which has been around for a long time and served a variety of different purposes, its most recent being a restaurant, which was not up to code. is they have deconstructed it with the help of Repurposed Savannah, and they are going to reconstruct it as a Gullah History Center. So the intention of the space is, since it has been a standing point in the community and a identifiable landmark in the community, an identifiable landmark in the community, they're creating this Bluffton Gullah Cultural Heritage Center, which is going to provide community education, programming, and exhibits on different things that are related to Gullah culture, which is such an important part of the South Carolina and Georgia racial identity and background for the people that Bridgette claims heritage from, which is really, really exciting. And I'm kind of bummed that we actually got to hear about this project before it's completed, because we didn't get to go visit. So this includes exhibits on indigo creation, artistry and midwifery, a lecture series, stuff about Black churches and cures and remedy. Yeah, a road trip, Melissa. Yeah, I think we should totally take one down there. So this was just a really fantastic presentation where she got to talk about the cultural significance of the Deer Tongue building, but also of the new purpose that it's going to be serving as a Gullah History Center, as well as the enormous amount of work that went into just getting to the stage where she could deconstruct the building and reconstruct it just to get it up to code, and how there was so much financial and personal investment that she had to make. Please don't do that. In this process in order to have it be successful. And so having her as a keynote presenter, I thought was fantastic. It was really wonderful to get to hear about her, but also to hear about it in the context of, while Bluffton is not Savannah, it is very close by and it is culturally relevant to this space. And yes, they are reconstructing it based on the original building form and design, but there are design changes specifically within the center of the building, or the interior of the building. So the intention was that the exterior of the building is going to remain more or less the same, but with some additions, but the interior of the building is going to be updated so that it has things like plumbing and AC, which did not exist in the building before. Let's see. There's going to be a lot of programming that I think, I mean, I will link some articles that I can talk about this a little bit more in depth so that I don't have to sort of bore you with all of the details, but the project is supposed to open in March 2025. And I do think, Melissa, that we should put together a little Minnesota road trip and go down and see it, because it seems like a very fantastic state of adaptive reuse within Bluffton and within the United States. And I believe I have the next presentation as well. Oh, my pictures didn't show up. Sorry about that. So this is kind of also scary to present on, because Emily Freeman, who is one of the presenters for this, is in this call. And so I feel like maybe I should just turn it over to her. But I am just going to do a really brief overview of the notes that I took on this session. And again, sorry that my pictures did not show up. But this was a really interesting and exciting session on deconstruction, the state of deconstruction in Boulder, both from a policy and a practitioner side. So I got the chance to listen to Emily talk about this, as well as Anna Perks and one other individual that I cannot remember the name of. And Emily, if you want to put that in the chat, that would be fantastic. Talking about what Boulder is trying to accomplish over the next 10 to 20 years. So by 2030, they plan to reduce their emissions by 70%. And by 2035, they plan to get to a net zero. And in 2040, they want to be carbon positive. And part of this, or a large part of this effort, is through their deconstruction ordinances that have been put in place in the city, which includes a Leanna Evanson, thank you, with the City of Boulder's facilities team. So they did a deconstruction deposit nexus study, which created a framework for the cost of deconstruction, and the deconstruction ordinance essentially levies a fine if you do not deconstruct or get it's a building approval for demolition, I believe. And Emily, please correct me again if I'm wrong. But they have a $1 per square foot deposit fee, which is required so that people who are trying to remove a building from a site have to go through their deconstruction process. They have multiple deconstruction partners, including the Resource Center and Western Disposal, and Anna Parks from Parks Deconstruction, who was one of the presenters who presented alongside Emily. Yeah, sorry, again, no pictures. I swear I put them in. I don't know why they're not there. So they were in this presentation, they talked a lot about the waste diversion that was happening in Boulder because of their deconstruction ordinance, and they were focusing specifically on the deconstruction of a large hospital that was there. And I thought that this was a fantastic example because they talked a lot about the deconstruction and the reuse of concrete, which is one of the highest embodied carbon building materials that we talk about in the deconstruction sphere. And what they had done was using it as, and again, Emily, please correct me if I'm wrong, but they were using it as a backfill so that they could re-level the space where the hospital had been originally built. And they used the broken down concrete from this. Thank you. These are my pictures. Sorry. So I thought that this was a really exciting thing to talk about because one of the things that we talk about a lot in the deconstruction sphere is the embodied carbon of building materials and how concrete and steel are two of the major players in that conversation. And the fact that they were able to deconstruct or break down the concrete that existed in this building and reuse it as backfill, I think is really exciting. And it gives us some more creative solutions for what we can do when we're doing a deconstruction where we can't necessarily reuse the drywall or reuse some of the other challenging building materials. There are solutions around that. We also got to hear, as I said, from Anna Parks from Parks Deconstruction, who is one of the partners with Boulder that does a lot of the deconstructions, specifically with the residential, on the residential side of things. And she was a fantastic resource because she is someone who came from the policy side of the deconstruction world. So kind of came out of this movement within Denver and Boulder to create deconstruction ordinances. And she decided that she loved the policy side and she knew a lot about it, but that the practitioner side of it was actually more for her. And so she filled that niche job market that has been growing more and more in all of our communities. So I will link, I also grabbed some articles on that, the hospital deconstruction that mentions money and space, always barriers to overcome. Yep. So I will link all of those and I will pass off my time to the next person. Thank you so much for listening.
I think the only reason why they didn't show up is that I might have started sharing before you put the photos in. And so that,
yeah,
even though it's supposed to be live, right? It's supposed to be Google Slides as Google Slides. It's supposed to be current, but apparently not. So I just opened a second copy and dragged it over.
Fully admit that I prepared these slides starting 10 minutes before I hopped on this call. So I apologize for my tardiness.
No. It's the information that you're sharing that's meaningful, not anything else. All right.
Yeah, so I will talk about this one, but I first thought, do you think it's a good time to check in to see if there's any questions from folks on what's been presented so far, or if folks have questions, just throw it in the chat.
Yeah, that's a good idea. No, thank you for that. And folks that attended the conference, if there's anything that you'd like to share as well, this is fairly unscripted, even if the 7 of us did organize this together. So let us know if you have a question or comment. People can use the chat.
Yeah, if there's none, that's totally cool too. But I think I have the next 3. So if anything comes up from folks, feel free to interrupt me. This Deconstruction Policy Panel was on Monday, and I had the honor of participating in it with 5 other wonderful folks in the deconstruction realm. So Emily Freeman with City of Boulder, who's on the meeting, Katie Kennedy with City of Seattle, Laura Zimmerman with City of Portland, and then Stephanie Phillips with the City of San Antonio. I believe Stephanie's in here too. So Emily and Stephanie, if anything comes up that you want to add, feel free to chime in. But basically, this session was an opportunity for folks around the country to share policy developments around deconstruction happening in their region and area. So we had some pre-scripted questions from a moderator and then open it up to questions from the audience. And I thought, since a panel is a little bit tricky to summarize, I could share high level kind of the policy, the current policy state for each of the kind of organizations here. So I'll start with San Antonio. I'm on the very left and Stephanie is sitting next to me in this picture. So City of San Antonio passed their deconstruction ordinance in 2022, and it includes small-scale residential buildings built prior to 1920 throughout the city. And then I'm reading, so I make sure that I have this correct. And then anything in their historic district or neighborhood conservation districts or anything designated as a local landmark is required to be deconstructed if it was built prior to 1945. So that has been going on for about a year and a half, but there was a lot of effort before that point to get the policy passed. And their team did a lot of stakeholder engagement to make sure that folks in different industries in San Antonio were had the opportunity to provide feedback on what they were proposing. You can imagine there are a lot of different, I think, opinions that they had to work throughout that stakeholder engagement process. And I'll share another interesting thing about San Antonio's deconstruction ordinance is that it's housed in their Office of Historical Preservation. So that's the office Stephanie works out of. And I just think that's unique because a lot of deconstruction policies are typically housed in like a sustainability or waste or kind of building department. So just a different lens, and San Antonio has a lot of historic buildings and neighborhoods. So yeah, just neat they're doing there. And then, so the two jurisdictions from the panel that have active deconstruction ordinances are San Antonio and Portland. So I'll jump to Portland. They've had their deconstruction ordinance since 2016. Folks have probably heard of it at some point or another if you've been involved in any deconstruction work in the past. And they've had a phased approach. And actually one of the other presentations kind of dives more into Portland. So more to come. And then next is Katie Kennedy with City of Seattle. They do not currently have an ordinance, but they've had a required salvage assessment that needs to be completed with demolition permits for a number of years. And so that's required for all whole building demolitions and also for projects that involve interior alterations valued over $75,000. And that salvage assessment can't just be done by the building owner or the general contractor. It needs to be done by a legitimate salvage organization that is vetted through the city. So it has to be someone who knows valuable materials to look for. And I think the salvage assessment is really interesting technique as kind of a segue to an ordinance because it's connecting the folks doing the projects with people that could potentially take the materials. So kind of informally setting up that relationship. And the hope there is that then the salvage organization can come back and take some of those materials out before demolition. City of Seattle also recently started offering deconstruction grants of up to $5,000, similar to the grants we offer in Hennepin County. So that's interesting too, to continue to incentivize deconstruction. And then we have Emily Freeman again with City of Boulder on the call, and they have a requirement for a deconstruction plan for demolition projects, and then also a requirement to divert 75% of materials generated from projects. And then Emily Noyes talked more about their work too. So that is kind of a high level overview of the different work going on across the country. I think it's interesting to note that although there's ordinances in some places, maybe recycling requirements in others. Yeah, each area is kind of approaching it in the way that I think is best for them, or kind of where their local economy and deconstruction industry is at. So yeah, I was really honored to be part of this. And can go to the next slide. Okay, this one I'm also really excited to talk about. So this was a presentation called Rewarding Progress in the Renovation Relay, Passing the Baton to Diversion, from Diversion to Design. So this was all about incorporating used building materials into design projects. That was from Olivia Wong with Goody Clancy, and then Brandy Townsend with a consulting firm, GBB, which I wrote down what that stands for because I can't remember, Gershman, Brickner, and Bratton, Inc. But I was really interested in what Olivia had to say about 3 different projects that her firm, Goody Clancy, worked on and tried to incorporate used building materials in. So the first one was a University of Massachusetts building. The second one was a Cornell University dorm. And then the third one was another University of Massachusetts building. And each project kind of served as a case study of lessons learned in incorporating used building materials. In the first project, incorporating building materials was kind of an afterthought, or used building materials, and they ended up swapping out some of the interior doors with used doors instead of getting new ones. And the aesthetics weren't exactly what they were looking for on the project, so their kind of workaround was to use those doors in like back of house areas for like janitor closets and bathroom doors, where the aesthetics weren't as important, but they could still utilize salvage materials for that. And lesson learned there was it's never too late for a salvage walkthrough, which I thought was really great, because we always say the earlier you can get deconstruction and reuse in the conversation for a project, the better. And while that's true, it's also never too late to try to incorporate salvage materials. And then the second project, Balch Hall, was a dormitory. They were renovating and trying to keep some of the existing historical charm of the building while updating it and getting the building up to code. They had there's a lot of doors in these case studies, but they had all these really beautiful interior doors that were no longer to code, and they didn't want to just toss them or donate them. They really wanted to keep them in the building to continue to kind of have that cultural heritage piece. And something super unique was that Ruth Bader Ginsburg lived in this dorm hall. And so they actually took the interior doors from her dorm and then made this wall panel. You can see in the photo on the bottom left, they have her collar to kind of commemorate RBG and her time she spent in that dorm. So it doesn't have the original use of a door, but kind of use it for paneling, and found a way to keep that material in use. And then the third one was a hall at the University of Massachusetts. And the photo here doesn't exactly show what they were working on this project, but there were some metal fencing, not fencing material, what is the name of it? Oh, they had metal paneling, that's what it was. In my mind, it looked like it's kind of fancy material, but they found a way to incorporate that back into the project. One of the obstacles they ran into was hazardous material testing. There was concerns of lead, but they were able to incorporate that back in and kind of presented that to the client team to get their thoughts, and really had to market it in a way that made used building materials in favor for the client. So I thought all 3 of these case studies were really interesting. My favorite was the dorm room and incorporating those walls. So even though these weren't like huge scale used building installation projects, I think it really showed their architecture firm that it's possible to work with these materials and sets them up for success for future projects. And they were really excited about the lessons learned there. And then I think I'm the next one too. Okay, so this session was what they call the solution session, where it was a little more interactive with the audience. So there were two presenters that kind of gave a short intro, and this one specifically was on what comes after the ordinance. So it was about the City of Seattle's deconstruction ordinance and maybe some unintended outcomes that have occurred since 2016 when they launched their ordinance. And again, Lauren Zimmerman from City of Portland presented, as well as Jackie Kurok-Fram, I'm probably pronouncing her last name wrong, I apologize, from the Rebuilding Center in Portland. So I kind of gave some just background. I think I included one more slide that shows some stats about, okay, yes. So some of you may have seen these slides before, but on the left shows the City of Portland's multi-phase approach to their ordinance. So in 2016, they started with, or prior to the grant, they started prior to the ordinance, they started offering grants, and then they launched the grants in 2016 for houses built prior to 1916 and historic, and then have expanded that year build as time has moved on. And then the second chart kind of shows total number of demolitions versus deconstructions since the ordinance started, which I think is really interesting. Some of the other benefits and outcomes that they shared is that deconstruction has become best practice in Portland. They track lumber and wood only for their projects, and just some stats, they find about 10,000 pounds of lumber removed per house, over 4,000 board feet of lumber, and in total, since the start of the ordinance, over 5.8 million pounds of lumber has been recovered for reuse, which is pretty fantastic. And this stat stood out to me. I actually repeated it to some coworkers the other day, that in sustainability and waste, we talk about plastic bags and straws and all these things that are problematic. But when we talk about building materials, they do have such a big impact. And one house deconstructed is the equivalent of 5.4 million plastic straws diverted. So kind of puts in perspective the kind of scale of building materials and the importance of keeping these materials not only out of landfill, but avoiding the embodied carbon with them as well. So yeah, background on kind of the ordinance. And in the brainstorm session, small groups kind of shared what they thought were the top most valuable materials that could be salvaged. And then we also talked about incentives, or kind of more teeth, so to speak, that the city could use to enforce their ordinance. I think some contractors are finding loopholes where they'll deconstruct a building, but they're not required to track it, and kind of dealing with some of those outcomes. So there was kind of a brainstorming session there. So if there are any questions, let me know. I know I kind of sped through that. My notes are very jumbled from the conference, so did the best I could to piece those together.
I think I might use straws as a unit of measurement for a lot of things now in the future. That is just astounding. Yeah.
I can't even fathom 1 million straws, let alone 5.4 million. Also, if I could add, oh, sorry.
No.
I thought of this when Josh was talking about the Rebuilding Center in Portland earlier. Something that I actually heard at the first Builder Use conference I went to in 2019 that has stuck with me is that when Portland passed their ordinance, the Rebuilding Center was one of their largest business services was deconstruction at the time. And since the ordinance took off and they've gotten a lot more private sector contractors involved in deconstruction work and trained to do it, they no longer really have a need for deconstruction. Others in the community were filling that gap. So they actually don't offer deconstruction services anymore, but they're really trying to get that usable material from the contractors who are doing it, and are trying to find those relationships to make it happen. And even if they go and pick it up, some contractors aren't willing to work with them. So it's just been interesting how the ordinance affected different businesses, both public and nonprofit, or private and nonprofit.
We have a question in chat about, are there other unintended outcomes that occurred as a result?
Yeah, I think the main thing that struck me was the contractors who were fulfilling the requirement by deconstructing, but then still sending the material to landfill. And it sounded like that was because it was cheaper, and I think that was one of the goals of this session, was to try to brainstorm, what's kind of going on. So it seems like a current some current challenges they're still dealing with. Melissa, were you in that one too? Did anything else stick out for you? I have ensuring materials go to the people that need them at a fair price.
Yeah, I think you covered it. Looks like there's a couple more questions coming up. Did Portland's deconstruction ordinance affect communities outside of Portland? Those that don't have such an ordinance, maybe more demo and outlying areas?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know if that came up.
I don't recall it. That would be interesting.
Yeah, that's a good question. Some of the suggestions that were talked about was potentially incentives, like giving extra points or expedited permits to contractors who are proving that they're reusing the materials and either donating them or reselling them. So those are some of the solutions that were brainstormed.
It does remind me that a lot of people here in Minnesota would love to have a statewide deconstruction requirement, and it's tough to do. There's not many states beyond California that does it on a statewide level. My cat is being annoying, but also very cute. And it's something that we're working on here in Minnesota, is to build the local support to be able to justify a statewide requirement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think with the Rebuilding Center, I don't think they expected that the ordinance would kind of put them out of business. Not that their organization has shifted to other things and they've navigated that and been very successful. But yeah, it's hard to, none of us are fortune tellers, so it's hard to know exactly. But research can help inform those decisions.
Katie.
All right, I'll get started. So Eden Bruckman is a cool lady. I met her the first day at the conference. She sat next to me in the audience, and she was asking tough questions, and you could tell she was getting a little bit fired up. So then we chatted a little bit after the presentation, and then she was the keynote speaker the next day, and I'm like, oh yeah, of course she's up on stage speaking. And then in fact she was on my flight on the way home, and so we got to chatting more. So our lives, I feel like, we're destined to cross. But I think my takeaway from this, so she gave the keynote. She's the chief sustainability officer for the county of San Diego, and as in that position, she's only been there, I don't even think 6 months. It's a pretty new position for her. But she is kind of like tapped into everything. My list of notes from her presentation are just like initiative after initiative after initiative. She's like, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. And I can put those things in the chat in case people want to research or deep dive into them. But it's so many that it's like I couldn't explain to you what any of them are without like probably 10 pages of notes, but I think that my takeaway is just having somebody in a position of government that is well supported by a network is such a powerful thing. She is unifying so many efforts and getting so much done as somebody with the support of government. And I'm just so inspired and hopeful that this is a thing. And I'm thinking, like, is this Melissa? Is this somebody? Have we identified who's championing this effort? But it's such a key thing. A lot of her presentation was talking about systems thinking and how to get priorities established, how to get people in alignment, how to, get problem solved. She talked about the 5 whys and how if you ask people, why they're doing something, eventually after asking 5 times, you'll get to the same answer at the end of the day. And so to have somebody that's that clever and that passionate in a position of power is like so inspiring. And I think every county, every state needs somebody like her. That's kind of my takeaway from her presentation. And then speaking of Melissa connecting people, we had a dinner prior to the start of the conference for Melissa's birthday, and she invited Stephanie Dalo from Carbon Leadership Forum. That was a cat. She is in Canada, I think Vancouver, leading the Carbon Leadership Forum, and that's something many of us on this call participate in, but really also serving as somebody that's kind of pulling together a lot of resources. I just threw in here a couple of slides from her presentation. So this one I loved. Eden actually, this is part of her question, is like the problem in TI, intent, that's jargon. So tenant improvement work. It's like the commercial real estate world where you're turning over office space every 10 years is kind of like that churn of development. So there's so many things that have within the built environment that turn over faster, and really prioritizing those things within the further in to the building. So things would be like furniture, equipment, and then it'd be walls, and then it'd be mechanical systems, but really focusing on those things that turn over faster as a priority when you're thinking about life cycle of the built environment. And I just thought this was a simple graphic that I'm like, okay, this is something I can take back to my office and we can actually work on these things. Like this conveys very simply the concept of why it's important to do research about what we're putting into our commercial interiors. And then the next slide is actually something she borrowed from our office, which I thought was hilarious and cool, because Perkins & Will is a international firm. We've got an office in Vancouver, and so she's connected with that group as well. But this is just a graphic showing the whole carbon life cycle, and thinking about it from sourcing all the way to not just the end of life, but beyond the life cycle of the built environment. So even after it's disposed of, what's happening. And that's kind of where we have to work, is how to tie the end of life carbon back to create a circular economy. And then the next slide is, I think, the last presentation. This was a design firm, Super Use. They came from Rotterdam. They had one person present, and then 2 others. I think it was just 2 others that were on Zoom call. So like as a presentation format, it was probably one of the least like finessed. It was like, oh, I could have probably done this from Zoom. I didn't need to come to Savannah for this presentation, but it's one of the presentations that stuck with me the most because it's like so related to what I do as an architect. So this is a firm in Denmark. They have done, I think the next slide, I don't know if I also was adding slides, so it might not be there, but I think I saw it. Yeah, so they did the circularity gap report. It was sponsored by the Circular Economy Foundation, so nonprofit, I think, put this forward, but it really identified where the gaps in their economy was from a circularity standpoint, and it demonstrated such an opportunity for economic growth, just by quantifying all that's being lost by not recaptivating it into the market, and so they're able to use that as a jumping off point to change how business operates. So this architecture firm, what they do is they really focus within reusing, like designing buildings with only reused materials. So they have, instead of like designing the building and then finding the thing, they get kind of halfway through the design process. And I think the next slide shows one of their projects. But the architect's designing for the program needs. Maybe they have a plan. They have like what the building wants to be, what the business is that's going to be operating in it. And the architect fills out this form and they're like, we're going to need, 50 linear feet of glazing, and we're going to need, some structural pieces. We're going to need a wood facade. Like whatever it is, they fill out, and then they have a position on staff called the material scout. And her job is to maintain networks of all of these reuse sources and connect the dots from those sources to the project. So that they actually get put into use. And there's, of course, it has to happen in the design phase because there's going to be back and forth about whether or not they could adjust the design to accommodate the material, or if they need to find a different material, if that material gets bought before they were able to, move on it. So a lot of their design thinking is building that flexibility to accept a wider tolerance in the design. So hey, we need a structure. We think it should be between these two heights. And kind of understand, there's a whole school of thought there that I'm like, this could be an architecture class of how to build that tolerance or room for adjustment into the design of a building. And I think a lot of their projects are smaller scale. I think it would be harder in, a central business district, but maybe that is already largely established as go back to one of those original slides. The exterior of a building is built for 100 years. The interior is in that 1 to 20 year life cycle. So really focusing on those markets for reuse seems like a good place to focus. I'm seeing some stuff in the chat, but I don't know if I need to yeah, we should get them here for AIA Minnesota. All right, that's it for my presentations.
Great. I think I'm speaking on Class Act, which I think won the prize for the most creative session title. So as someone who spent a long time in historic preservation and still is a big proponent of historic or repurposing historic structures, this session led by Gretchen Worth from Crowd was particularly inspiring to me. So Crowd is a pretty impressive consortium of nonprofit agencies, researchers, advocates in upstate New York, not unlike a lot of the energy we have here in Minnesota. And so working together to promote deconstruction, material reuse across various sectors. And this presentation was about this sort of, I guess, I wouldn't call it a seed of an idea because they've definitely put in a ton of work to imagine the possibility of turning vacant school buildings or currently unused school buildings into circularity centers. So researchers and advocates within Crowd have done, well, first recognized an issue that a lot of communities across the country have, right? We have school districts that are merging and school buildings that are being closed, and people are wondering what to do with them. Of course, there are examples all over of interesting reuse and repurposing of schools into community centers, senior living, affordable housing, things like this. But this idea to turn schools into building circularity centers, places for reused materials to be housed, people to learn rehab, repair, repurposing skills. I mean, the opportunities were sort of endless. And so what Gretchen and her team have done is they showed an amazing image or screenshot, I guess, of this very in-depth spreadsheet of identified vacant school buildings, their location, their square footage, their potential, like the populations of the communities they're in, all sorts of different metrics that could be used to test or to see where might this idea actually get off the ground. And then Andrew Robley, a historic preservation consultant, offered sort of a walk through history of how school buildings and structures have developed over time, how their uses have changed, but also referenced the qualities that make school buildings particularly useful for projects like this. And interestingly enough, some of those qualities are the same things that make school buildings useful for a lot of different things. They're often close to city centers. They have wide hallways. They have lots of natural light in many cases. Large gym spaces or cafeterias are like clear central gathering spaces for whatever the potential future use could be. So yeah, they have some pretty big dreams for repurposing these school buildings throughout upstate New York. And in addition too, it's not just like maybe we do one here, it's maybe we do one here and then over here and then over here and kind of create this like network of places that can lean off of each other. You know, one space might focus on one type of material or one sort of craft and the other might focus on something else. But it can be this like pathway or you know, people talk about foodways, right? But it could be like a material way of spaces throughout upstate New York. So I don't have much more to say about that, but it was a very inspiring idea and a lot of energy coming out of that part of the country for reused materials and spaces to support them.
And Natalie, I have a quick, oh, sorry, Melissa, go
No,
ahead.
go ahead, Olivia.
I just had a quick question on like who owns the vacant schools? Are they still owned by the school districts or did the cities get them or how did that like work?
Yeah, it depends on the property. I think in many cases they are probably the school district is either sitting on them or has like relinquished them to the city that they are in. But it kind of depends on its status, place by place. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
I was just going to add that a lot of my recent adaptive reuse interest stemmed around schools. So hearing or seeing on the local news not quite a year ago about an elementary school up north being turned into like a Airbnb style rental, I found all these other schools, and then I found out that Rethos actually has a dedicated program to try to get these schools adaptively reused. And so this makes sense that this is happening in New York and every state, I'm sure, to some extent. And if it's not happening, it certainly can happen. People do turn, you know, buildings like this into something else.
Duluth Central High School up on top of the hill, they just did it.
That's right.
It's
Beautiful
pretty
building.
sweet. It's pretty sweet if you ever get a chance sometime. I believe it's now accessible, but they really did a wonderful job up there. Kind of an odd building to be able to turn into housing, but yeah, it's pretty cool up there.
More odd than other schools that have been turned into housing, or?
Well, they've done so the my youngest daughter was bounced around from school to school during the reconstruction phase of a lot of the schools in Duluth, and they turned the first one that I saw them do. I mean, a lot of the old schools in Duluth are now housing, but they turned the middle school down in Lincoln Park, which is a lower end neighborhood in Duluth, and it's certainly starting to bud into the kind of the neighborhood to live in because of the craft district that's come in down there.
Sure.
And so that school was redone, and it's essentially, you know, everybody in town is, let's not tear our schools down, let's turn them into something. And so Central was the largest one that they've done, and I think the contractor that got that property and decided to turn it in, they've been doing a fantastic job. Up this far, I haven't been on site, but I've seen photos from people, and I think of course that pursuit to utilize the building structure because there's nothing wrong with it.
Right.
Fantastic. Just keep going.
Yeah, if structures are built to last up to 100 years, why aren't they? Why are we tearing them down before they need to be remodeled? All right.
This is me.
All right, take it away.
So, Felix, I had a quite the long discussion with Felix at two different sessions because both of the times that things that were involved with his lab at Cornell were talked about, it's stuff that hit really close to home for me up at NRI. I've been here 30 years, so I've been involved with way more things than just material reuse and building deconstruction. We've done, I've done a lot of work with the major lumber producers in the country to test their materials in-house. And our regional stuff has come through here to go, and it's 50-year cycle of retesting materials from the field to make sure they haven't lost any of their structural properties, and submitted that 40-page report or whatever to the folks at the National Wood database level. So a lot of the stuff that Felix was talking about in this presentation were things that I've actually done. The testing things, it's important to be able to say, if we're going to structurally reuse this material, the timbers that are created from this, there has to be testing done on it. And I was just fascinated with the things that they were, the design plans that they had, the things that they wanted to do to make sure that they weren't losing any of the structural properties of how the fasteners connect to the pieces, how the layers of material offer the rigidity that's required for certain types of construction, and of course then some of the things that they are doing to remove some of these toxic adhesives and things like that are used in the construction of those types of structural beams and structural materials now, that ultimately deem them unreusable at some future point. So the things like nail laminated timber and structural adhesives that, the newer chemistry, the green chemistry that's starting to make its way into the construction industry, looking at those different types of designs. How would we manipulate the reused lumber so that it has a stronger holding power between two pieces of lumber? And then looking at this structure here that's in the picture, there, Felix's little snippet on him on the Cornell web page. He's an architect and an academic, working towards a systematic redesign of the built environment. And he wants, the built environment. Let's make the built environment a material depot. So this design here is that, he works with architecture students to design for deconstruction. So they built this thing, then they take it apart and they move it to another location and build it. It might not be the same construction the next time around because the design has changed, but they're using all of the same components, putting fasteners in different locations and not losing any of the strength properties of these timbers that they've created. And I think it's just a fantastic way to teach students that material can be reused many times before it has to be changed in or made into something else. And to be able to say that you can use materials for building buildings more than once, I think is an important step in us getting this accepted, the reusable materials as an acceptable building material. That is kind of where we are right now. We really need to change the rules on what can be reused and it for new construction versus just I can take a bunch of 2x4s and 2x6s and go and build a shed or a deer stand with it or something like that. I want to be able to say I can build an addition on my house without having to go buy all brand new lumber. I'd love to be able to do that. If it involves some timbers, why can't I make a laminated timber beam or have a company who uses reused material to do that? So his presentation hit so close to home because they're using all of the same testing equipment that I have in my lab here that I use to break 2x4s and rip things apart and test the strength and pull fasteners out. It was such a great connection, him and I. And of course, I had to go talk to him afterwards and give him my card and say, we really need to have a project design. Somehow we can work together. School of Architecture and Design here in the University of Minnesota was just up here a couple of weeks ago, and it sounds like NRI is going to start working with them on certain things. And I think I'm going to bring reused material immediately to the conversation. So that certainly gives some opportunities to how we forward this in state of Minnesota here. And then you can jump to the next one. The next one, it ties right in. This is still part of the Cornell University. This is one of the students, Felix, Andrew, and again, this technology that they are using there, we were using to do things in 2011 here up at NRI and around the state of Minnesota as part of some non-destructive testing that we had projects for historic structures in the state of Minnesota. We found out that the covered bridge down in Zumbrota had no plans. There was, if the river washed it away, the bridge was gone forever and there was nothing they could do. And we used this LiDAR type technology back in the day when you had to go and not what they do, you had to go and literally put a target onto the structure and then set up scanners from multi different angles to be able to take picture after picture after picture. And then painstakingly, at least I had an engineering student to do this, painstakingly reassemble all of these picture point clouds together to make a 3D image. And the technology advancements since 2011, where they can fly a drone around the outside of the building and get similar point cloud assemblies, is just fascinating. It was unbelievable. And then they've gone the next step into being able to say the wall section here, they can go walk through the structure on the inside with a video on a cell phone and find out what's in the walls, and then put that all together with these images. It all gets brought into a computer. They can break down these structures into sections and determine how much material can be saved out of this building through building deconstruction. So you could almost get a deconstruction materials list from doing these scans like this. And I thought that was such unique use for this type of technology that we never thought of doing before. In our past, it was preservation of historic structures. So when you don't have a blueprint available, we can scan it and literally build a blueprint from that scan. Well, they're doing the same thing here, but they're saying this structure, rather than come in with a backhoe, here's what we can actually salvage without even having to tear into it. And there's some assumptions made based on architecture of structures, and they know how walls are built. Sometimes you have to knock sections of walls to verify that yes, indeed, it's made with 2x4s or 2x6s. But it's amazing how you can fly a drone around the outside of a building, walk through the inside of a building with a cell phone video going on, and this information gets brought into a computer that would tell you you have this many wall sections of 2x4s, 2x6s, beams, flooring. All of this stuff can be put right in to the computer program into like an Excel spreadsheet type thing. They would go in then and be able to compute things like your carbon offset, or embodied carbon, which hits to home with another thing that we've been doing with deconstruction since we started doing that here. We have all of these spreadsheets and calculators that we've created to look at environmental impact, and to be able to incorporate that all with the same program that does the scanning and prediction for all of the material that can be pulled out. I think this is going to continue to become easier and make it easier for people who want to do building deconstruction and historic preservation, especially, to be able to come in and manipulate with a computer, manipulate exactly what's in there, and essentially put together a list of everything that's required to either rebuild this, or in the future, if some catastrophe should happen, they'd have an exact list of what needs to be acquired to be able to rebuild a structure exactly the same way. And like I said, we did a lot of this stuff early on with non-destructive testing and preservation, and I was just floored by how they've adapted the same technologies and really made it easy for people. Well, at least it's pointing the way for people who are doing deconstruction to be able to utilize a tool like this and really save themselves a lot of time in the front. It's one of those things that we all are working on. How do we make deconstruction more affordable? That's certainly the start of it there. So
there's one question in chat for you, Vic. What kind of time and expense would be involved in that scan? I think that's a really good question. And Margot, excuse me, Margot is from Better Futures, Minnesota. And so I can very much understand why that question's being asked, but it's a good one for all of us.
Yeah, Margot, well, we'll talk about this. Jason and Alex weren't in the session that I was at, but this is all kind of new technology that's being developed by Cornell. So they're in the early phases of, does this really work? How do we do multiples? But they've done full-size structures like this. It would probably involve a little bit of computer work. So they're using engineering students and architecture students to be able to look at these scans and make these assumptions about the structure of the building, stuff that could be easily incorporated. I believe that this is going to be coming very soon. We don't really have this technology the way they have it out there, but I would assume that if we can get any kind of a development grant with Cornell, or if Cornell does continue this work, we should certainly be talking to them as how do we collaborate with you to bring this technology across the country versus just in one part of it. So we'll be working on that for sure in the near future, especially if we get this next grant.
And obviously you'll be keeping me in the loop so that I can share what I know with the broader audience here.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Thank
For sure.
Thank you. Okay, so that wraps up actually the individual presentations by overviews by each of the folks. We'll spend just a couple minutes talking about the tour that most of us, all of us, maybe on this meeting attended. There was one formal tour that was organized, and it was pretty cool. Let me say that. We had a chance to tour Repurpose Savannah. And, just like other reuse centers where people deconstruct and sell their materials, there's, some of the same materials that you tend to see from time to time everywhere. But during their deconstruction, they obviously find some really unusual items which they had on display. And I personally love the fact that they're using hard hats for decoration. So there's a point in time where hard hats shouldn't be worn anymore, but that doesn't mean you have to throw them away. I know that we've struggled here in Minnesota to find better recycling markets for those. So why not use it for decoration if that's your thing? Some of these photos I did take from the other presenters' slide decks. So if others want to talk about a specific photo, I'm pretty psyched whenever I can see some live edge wood, now that I know that that's a thing. And, looking at all these doors, it's just amazing that they would have ended up in the landfill if somebody didn't, care, basically. So many
Hey,
people
Melissa,
took,
do you remember,
Yeah.
sorry, do you remember if that the live edge stuff was that acquired because of urban, if things coming down in the urban environment, or was that part of projects, where they maybe had to remove it for deconstruction or something on the property?
I don't
didn't ask
know.
that question.
Anybody else know?
I know we saw
This-
some. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say the wood pictured in this photo is from Urban Lumber. It was a tree that came down and they processed in their kiln, and people were purchasing it because it was from a park where people tended to like get married and have notable life events. So
Oh,
yeah.
That's right. Good memory, Emily. I was gonna say, I remember the lumber outside the building that had just come in from one of the docks that was pulled out of the water. It was really cool.
Is that?
It's not in the presentation, but I have a photo of it I can add to the chat. And then I was gonna add a link to Repurposed Savannah's website if anyone's interested in checking them out. I think something that's really unique about them is they are women and women plus led, which is super kind of unique to this field, and they're doing really awesome work. So it was great to see their site. And we also saw an alligator. They come up against a marsh. I thought people were joking when they said, look out for gators. Haha, we're in Georgia. But no, there was a gator there.
I should have gone out to go look for the gators. All of them were named Frank, right? If I remember correctly, 3 different ones named Frank. So I didn't ask questions about what the numbers and letters meant, but obviously this is some sort of material.
I know.
Blanking on the words.
We did ask.
Okay.
Alex and I were standing there and asking what all the numbers were, and so on these boards, so all of this stuff tagged is their code for the deconstruction project. So a lot of the times it just lets them know where it came from, part of their tracking system. Each of our little name tags that we had these codes on them too. So if you look at, it's similar. What wood did they take this? So it might have been a chunk of whatever. There was these codes stamped on your little or written on your name tag, and you could see. Then that would tell you where they could look at that and say where that wood came from, and that's what these codes are from. And so when I was talking to Alex Baldwin from Better Futures about this, he thought, that's a great way, especially if you're deconstructing a historic structure. Or recovering materials from a historic structure that they don't intend to replace. At least you've got connection to history when you reuse this wood. And we've always talked about doing that on almost every deconstruction project. Why shouldn't we be able to say that wood came from this 300-year-old house or whatever? I think that's a fantastic way to track it. And part of our current project at things coming in at the Becker County, they are starting to put QR codes on.
Oh.
And so Alex is trying to figure out how they can QR code every piece coming in that would say it parts. Boom, there's a little information about where it came from, when it came in. Fantastic idea to track stuff. And if you're talking about certifications for green wood, it's certainly something that they'll require eventually.
Right.
And that's something I know they've always talked about at Better Futures.
There's so many different layers of history that is connected to used building materials. The humans that use it or built it or renovated it or deconstructed it, but the materials themselves obviously tell the story. And it just it hurts a little when I know that some of these buildings that have stories get demolished and landfilled. It's such a waste. Yeah.
And Vic, you might have already said this with repurposed Savannah, but I remember they said when people make a purchase there, they'll send them, or when, I can't remember if it was a purchase or a full deconstruction project, but they'll send customers away with like a one-pager about all that.
Oh, cool.
All the history from that, where the material came from. So kind of telling that story. But that takes a lot of administrative work, so I give them a lot of props for doing that.
I think it's true though that that's where it's going is needing to track that for a lot of different reasons. The bonus of the history, you know, the literal history of that, I think is important too. So a bunch of people hanging around under a big tree, some lights and fire. So there was a great opportunity for those that wanted to partake in an oyster roast. And it was a hit. Before the event happened, there was like 150, 170 out of 235 people that were registered for this event. And the hosts did a really great job of having white bean chili for those that would not necessarily prefer, for whatever reason, oysters. And we were brought in by trolley. We got a chance to tour this facility. Some people got to see alligators and sample some oysters or chili. So great opportunity to kind of hang out, relax, and just get to know people a little bit better one-on-one or in a large group like this. And then finally, I know that there are other people in this picture who were on the call or could still be on the call. I just wanted to do a shout out for those that were co-presenting with me today, that we have 3 out of the 7 people who co-presented that are board members. So Natalie's been a board member for a while. When did you start?
I'm going into my second term of 3 years. So
Okay, awesome.
3 years.
Very cool. And Olivia and I just started last month. So we got elected actually at the conference itself with its annual board meeting. And we're very proud to be representing Minnesota and hope to have that cross-sharing of information to learn and share. Yes, there is a Carbon Leadership Forum reuse subgroup here in Minnesota. And I have been planning on wanting to connect more people. Very cool. More people around Minnesota to that. That's on my to-do list. So very cool. I hadn't seen those photos. I definitely didn't get to see Frank 1, 2, or 3. So that was the running joke. They're all, can't really tell them apart. Why not give them all the same issue? Give them all the same name. Teach me to try to read and talk at the same time. But it was a really good opportunity for all of us, and I'm really glad that as many people were able to go as they could, but again, wanting to provide this opportunity for folks that wouldn't be able to attend or obviously missed sessions because they were speaking. And I just wanted to thank the panelists today for their presentations. Sorry, the photos are somewhat squished or not squished. That's how it works. But thank you so much, everybody. Any last questions? Any last comments anybody would like to make?
We're hoping in the next few years, maybe the Builder Use Conference will come to here. We don't know yet, but we have a lot of momentum. So
Absolutely.
TBD.
There's a lot of people who, you know, I'm kind of lukewarm about it because it seems like a lot of work. But the Minnesota contingent at the conference came up to me and they're like, let's do this. Let's offer to host. And I'm like, well, okay then. So super psyched. I do believe tomorrow is the day. So March 23rd, I think the announcement of filling out an RFP, a request for proposal, will be going out tomorrow. Today's Friday. Today. It's supposed to happen today. week is really thrown off for some reason. So anyways, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for those of you who are watching this after the fact. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate you. Thanks for being part of this awesome system of sustainable built environment work.
Thank you so much for organizing this, Melissa.
Me too.
Yeah, thanks for organizing. Thanks for coming, everyone.